again, thanks for joining me. If you're not, let's see. Okay, cool. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. This panel is called, Should We Eat Pokemon? It is just like it sounds, right? We're going to be talking about some sort of ethical issues that a lot of people think about, or maybe should think about when discussing should we eat Pokemon, the lovable creatures that hopefully I think most trainers try to be friends with. So we'll talk about the ethical issues. We'll learn a little bit about Pokemon. Go through some Pokedex entries. Go into the lore, stuff like that. I'll show you some screenshots from the games, from the anime, and yeah, we'll have a good time. I do want to say that I will not present you with an answer to the question on here. I'll present you with questions that you can ask yourself. Really think through when you go home tonight. Very excited about the con, but also deeply concerned about the moral questions that I raised here. I'm sure that'll happen.
The moral questions of the Pokemon universe?
Yeah. I am, of course, well aware that this is a game and anime series, one of the biggest media franchises in the world. You don't necessarily need to take all this into account, and I'm not telling you, not to play any games or enjoy any anime that you would like to. I play a lot of Monster Hunter, so even if I was concerned with animal rights, I'm not so much when I return this. So, a bit about me, just to let you know why I'm talking about this, why I decided to do this topic. My name's Scott. I am a former undercover investigator. I work in the animal rights space, right? So if you've ever seen stuff online, which is, like sad footage from inside a farm or like a processing plant, I'm gonna call it a processing plant. I don't know, what the rules are about me describing things are. That is sort of the vibe of what we do. We do employment-based investigations, which means that we actually work at those facilities. I've worked at a few processing plants for like 6 months apiece, stuff like that. So I have a pretty solid understanding, I think, of how those industries operate. I'm also the director of investigations for the organization I work for, which means I get to see the raw footage and talk to the investigators when they're at different farms and processing plants. So I get a lot of information that way. So yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about this sort of ethical topic. As for, I guess, like Pokemon credentials, I am 34 years old, which puts me right sort of in the strike zone for the audience of Pokemon Red and Blue when they came out, right? That was in 1998.
We're old.
Yeah. Yay, old heads. So I played those games when they came out on my, purple and clear Game Boy Color. I believe I picked Squirtle for my first, as I think we had a turtle back then as a pet. I have played through most of the gens. I skipped Alola, I'm sorry. I was a little burned out at that time. And in high school, me and my friends got pretty into competitive battling, so we would do all the breeding for individual values, training for EVs. If you don't know what those are, it doesn't matter. It's not part of this. I'll do a breeding one next time, maybe. But that's probably why my favorite Pokemon tend to be the more like competitively viable ones, right? Like Garchomp over there. I don't know how he is in Scarlet and Violet now. I think there's a lot of fairies running around. It might not be great. But yeah, that's my sort of Pokemon stuff. So first, let's tackle this big question, right? Which, if the answer is no, why are we even here? Do people eat Pokemon? This right here is a screenshot, of course, from the anime. It's got Ash, it's got Brock, Satoshi, and Takashi, if you're nasty. And they are thinking about enjoying a nice, cut-up Magikarp. They don't end up doing this in the show. This is a thought that they have, but it shows you, right, that the sort of intent is there for a lot of this. There are a few examples of Pokemon actually, telling you in lore that Pokemon are being eaten. Farfetch'd Pokedex entry. This is from the anime as well. Obviously it says Farfetch'd makes a delicious meal, especially when cooked with leek. So he's kind of, his own prepared meal, his own meal kit. You just stick him in there. But again, this is one of the Pokemon that is eaten by people. Sharpedo is another one. Looking at his Pokedex entry, it has a sad history. In the past, its dorsal fin was a treasured foodstuff, so this Pokemon became a victim of overfishing. That is from Moon. So this sort of echoes real life, right? Shark finning, I think, is a thing that a lot of people have heard about, where essentially like sharks are caught, their fins are removed, and the sharks are thrown back into the water. The sharks do not survive this, right? Shark fins, the dorsal fins are really important to them to keep them from to keep them balanced in the water. And you've also, made a big wound in them. So yeah, a lot of them don't survive this. And it sounds like Sharpedo also didn't. Worth noting is that it says it has a sad history, and it says in the past, right? So in the Pokemon world, this may be a case where this Pokemon was eaten for its fin. It isn't now, or it might be that it is still eaten for its fin, and this is just like done at a much more manageable level, right? We don't have any information to sort of conclude either way on that one. This, I think, is the most interesting one. Look, if you speak Japanese, or if you can read that, it says Kingura Marugoto Seafood Kare, which is like whole Kingler seafood curry, essentially. The reason I think this is interesting is because I could only find this screenshot in Japanese. I looked on Bulbapedia, looked at the curries in there. This is not listed in there. So I don't know if this is a Japanese version exclusive where they removed it for other audiences because maybe they didn't want to admit to other audiences that they put a whole Kingler in here, or maybe it's a fake, but it's a good fake if it is one, because it does look like just the other curries that are in the game. That's why I put a maybe in there. Even if this particular one isn't true, there are other crustacean-based foods that we see in Pokemon, which I'll show you guys later. So, I'm gonna go. Now you're sad about it because it's cute? Yeah? So I'll throw a few reasons why people might eat Pokemon at you. A lot of pretty common reasons, I think, that people would bring up. One is sort of this more like food web, I should say. Sorry, that's the more technical term. Nature's way sort of arguments that Pokemon eat other Pokemon, right? It happens in nature, it's fine. Second is, they look delicious, right? I was hearing a little bit in the crowd from some people speculating what Pokemon they'd like to eat. Here is Alcremie, who honestly you don't need to eat. We'll talk about her later. She sort of produces cream that she can give to people, so that's not an issue here. It's cream, it's whipped cream. Come on. There is the argument that we need to eat them. That's sort of a nutritional sort of argument. And the last thing is, sort of, they don't really deserve moral consideration, right? They're not people, Some people say that.
They're sentient though.
That's wrong.
Maybe we'll talk about that. Huh? But first, let's play some Who's That Pokemon? So we're not going to do this the normal way with a silhouette. That's kind of, I don't know, it's easy unless it's, one of the ball ones. But raise your hands if you think, I'm going to show you a Pokedex entry, right? And if you think you know what it is, raise your hand. If you get it right, you can come up and grab some airheads if you would like. Ready? Boom. What is it? When hunting, it skims the surface of water at high speed to pick off unwary prey such as Magikarp. I'm gonna let you guess again because that is in the line? Bidget, nice. Feel free to grab some candy if you want. You can grab a couple, I don't really mind. Very good, very good. There will be other ones, it's cool. You'll also get candy for participating just at the end when we do questions or whatever. So again, yeah, Pokemon, they're eating other Pokemon. That is nature's way, as it is. Who's this guy? Sorry, that's not a question. If you have not seen this guy, this is Cramorant, right? Like a cormorant, the real life bird. Normally he eats Arrokuda, right? Which is a fish Pokemon like a Barracuda, right? From the name. Sometimes though, he dives down and somehow gets a Pikachu. I don't know how he dives down into the water and there's a Pikachu there for him to grab. That's sort of, yeah, it could be surfing Pikachu. He bailed on his last ride. He's down there. But he tries, right? Cramorant, he eats some Pokemon. He tries to eat some, even though they don't quite fit in his mouth. So it is well established that Pokemon eat other Pokemon. So if Pokemon are eating other Pokemon, right, if that's just the way nature works, why don't we, take part in that, right? We're animals as well. I don't know if we're Pokemon as well. We can talk about that later too. But that sort of argument, right, at least when used in real life, is often called an appeal to nature, right? Which is the idea that if something is natural, if it takes place in nature, then it must be okay, it must be a moral thing, it must be morally, I guess, like defensible, we'll say. So the thing is, nature, pretty nasty a lot of the times, right? I don't think that you would take some things that happened in nature and really apply them to how you should behave in real life, right? So let's read this little blurb that I got from Wikipedia, which, is fine as a source, I think, personally. But when one or two male lions defeat and exile the previous males of a pride, the conquerors will kill any existing young cubs fathered by the losers. As many as 80% of lion cubs die before they reach the age of 2, right? So in The Lion King, this would be if Scar came in, right, after Mufasa died. Spoilers? That's not a spoiler, right? And then he killed Simba and Nala, right? Basically, this is so that Scar can, father children instead of having to raise children that aren't his. So this happens in nature. Obviously, it's very common since so many cubs die. But if we were to extrapolate this to human behavior, your stepdad probably couldn't come into your family and dispatch your siblings, right? That would probably, I think, general consensus, be kind of rude of him. We'll move on. This is, at least 100 species of songbirds have been tested for extra pair paternity, and over 75 of those species show evidence of cheating. So a lot of birds, right, they mate for life, yeah? Not all of them, but a decent number of them. But apparently, they're running around on the side, Again, I don't know how it is in bird culture, but they're probably not telling each other about their little extra pair affairs. And to do the same thing to your real life partner or human partner, probably not that cool, yeah? But these are animals, right? They're not Pokemon, and we are talking about Pokemon. So let's talk about how Pokemon are behaving in nature. Ooh, another Who's That Pokemon? Another Pokedex entry, so raise your hands if you think you know. If a traveler is going through the desert in the thick of night, blank will follow in a ragtag group. The Pokemon are biding their time, waiting for the traveler to tire and become incapable of moving. Thoughts? Trapinch, no. That is a solid guess, though. Dunsparce, no. Gangster. Nice. Very good. Yeah. So again, expanding this to human behavior, if you were driving around through the desert, you saw someone struggling out there, Do you just wait for them to die? Is that the cool moral thing for you to do? If you're really interested in appeal to nature, yeah, that might be what you do, because that's what the Pokemon Cacturn does, yeah? All right, I believe I have one more. The moment this Pokemon finds someone who's emitting strong emotions, it will pummel them senseless with its braids to silence them. Who's that Pokemon? I'll give you one more, because it's in the line. Yeah, you don't know that name, that's fine. Yeah, I'll give it to you, Hatterene. So yeah, if your friend comes to you, right, in friendship, they're like, man, I lost my job, my partner broke up with me, I don't have any money, I'm real down on my luck, you know? And you look at your friend, you look at them in the eyes, and you just start laying hands on them. You're tired of this. You hate all of this venting. You hate feeling this strong emotion from other people. Yeah, that would probably not be a cool thing to do. So basically, all those slides were basically just to tell people that, maybe don't copy what animals do. That might not be a good moral argument. So, second argument, right? Pokemon, in general, look pretty delicious, or they could be prepared the right way. This is Klawf al Aheel. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It is a dish where it's in real life like prawns cooked in garlic and other spices and stuff like that. So Klawf, I think, is an interesting idea, an interesting example. Klawf, technically their claws grow back after you eat them. So maybe Klawfs don't have to be killed for this. But at the very least, they are sort of put off by the loss of their claw, right, for a while. The claws grow back, but there is nothing in this dish that suggests where you got this claw from. Whether it was offered up freely, which would be weird, because, would you offer up your hand to someone freely, even if it grew back after a while? Kind of a bummer. But yeah, this is sort of the idea that, Pokemon don't really have that sort of, they don't deserve that sort of moral consideration. This is maybe like an egoism sort of argument where people should basically just like be chasing their own pleasure, right? Chasing their own happiness. And it's, potentially regardless of what happens to others. So this, I think, is an argument where you also have to consider what other foods you can make, right? So there are a lot of foods you can make within the games. Like this toast curry, which is a little bit of a different vibe, kind of a weird pairing maybe with curry, but it is something that you can eat and something that looks pretty good as well, right? So if you do want to eat Pokemon, because they do look delicious, that is, you have to sort of decide whether those specific tastes, right? Whether the specific taste of Pokemon meat is worthy of you, doing what you do and eating them. Or whether you can substitute it effectively with other things that, even if they don't taste exactly the same, are still pretty good, right? Okay, so do we need to eat Pokemon? This is something that I think we have the least amount of information for, so this one hopefully will be a little bit quicker. One thing we have to consider is the humans in the Pokemon world, or whether they are actually humans, right? Because like in the games, you'll do some pretty normal stuff, right? Maybe the most impressive thing you'll do as a human in the games is do some like sick tricks on your acro bike, But in the anime, this is somewhat different. It's kind of become a meme with Ash at this point, where he'll do pretty.
There's an avatar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the game of Sun and Moon, you have Cosmog in a bag.
Yeah.
Cosmog weighs way too much.
Cosmog, yeah, I think he weighs like thousands of pounds, something like that. He is some sort of like black hole-esque thing. So yeah, they're doing some pretty weird stuff in Pokemon World. Ash, obviously, he's been like electrocuted, he's been lit on fire a whole bunch of times. He's still doing good, He's chilling, he's throwing that log, he's having a fun time. So I don't know whether people are really people in the Pokemon world, and so it's hard to know what sort of nutrients they need. And it's also hard to know what sort of nutrients Pokemon actually provide, right? There are things in the Pokemon world that you can supplement with, right? You can feed them to Pokemon though. Vitamins, they, basically increase your effort values. Again, you don't need to know what those are, but they are supplements, right? It's protein, it's calcium, it's iron, it's all that stuff. The only time nutrition is really mentioned, I think, in Pokedex lore and lore in general, is with a lot of the byproducts, right? So we'll. Sorry.
Also, there is in Pokedex, they actually talk about milk tanks and milk and how it actually provides vitamins and minerals. So if you drink that, I think it actually gives you vitamin D.
There's mineral water.
There's mineral water. What is that? Is this what?
Is this more?
Vor? Does it count as vor? I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe, if you wanted to. Think about it later. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of byproducts that are mentioned that have nutritional value. Miltank milk, Moo Moo milk, Chansey eggs are another thing that we'll talk about later. It has that sort of nutritional value. But the nutritional value of eating a Pokemon itself isn't really explored, right? So this is sort of an open question. Okay, do Pokemon deserve consideration morally? Should you protect them, cherish them, forfeit all your belongings to them? Or can you put them and a bunch of their friends in a weird claw machine as much as you want? I don't know what they're doing there. And when people often make this argument, it comes from this sort of thought that humans are different, right, from Pokemon, right? We're not the same, and there's something special about humans that means that we are perfectly okay with doing what we will with them. In this picture I put, it's a screenshot of Bea training with her Pokemon, looking very, very similar to them, right? They're doing all the right moves, stuff like that. So yeah, not too much difference there. So what is the difference then between people and Pokemon gives rise to this sort of argument? There's a common argument that you will see in real life. It's called Name the Trait, and it is basically a challenge for people to think about what trait would, in real life, an animal, right? But here we're doing Pokemon. So what traits do Pokemon possess or lack which would justify you eating them? Normally this is a sort of cognitive ability, right? Or emotional ability, something like that. It's normally not well, they don't have hands mostly, so that justifies it. Mostly it's about how they can think and stuff like that. But yeah, maybe you can think of a reason or a trait in this case, and feel free to bring it up later because I'll have space for that. But there are examples in the game which will show that Pokemon and people, at least in folklore, right, maybe aren't too different at all, right? If you read Japanese, that left-hand column, right? Pokemon to kekkon shita hito ga ita. There were people that married Pokemon. It also says there were Pokemon that married people. This was in the Japanese version only. The English release, as it says in the right-hand column, that was changed so that they sort of share the same table, right? To get rid of those weird connotations that I put out there. But it also says, right, this was a normal thing to do because long ago Pokemon and people were the same, right? I don't know if this means that they were literally physically the same. There's a lot of different lore around creation of the universe and stuff like that in Pokemon. Or if it means that they were basically treated the same, right? Maybe back then, long ago in Sinnoh's history, that's where Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum took place. Maybe Pokemon basically were treated the same as people, they had all the same rights, stuff like that, right? It's hard to know, because again, this is from a book that you find in-game or something like that. The point is, yeah, there is some examples of them potentially being treated the same. So maybe you just don't think that Pokemon or really anything matters morally, right? There is this sort of thinking it's just maybe like a nihilist sort of viewpoint, which is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is ultimately meaningless. Maybe you're pretty sad about it, huh? But if you subscribe to this sort of thinking, right, obviously you can sort of apply this to any and all moral questions, right? If you don't think it matters at all, you can justify just about anything, even poor treatment of other people, not just treatment of Pokemon. And I do want to make this distinction between meaning and special meaning, right? So if you subscribe to this, maybe you don't believe there is special meaning in anything, right? We're all just, it's all just sort of dust to dust, ashes to ashes sort of stuff. But that doesn't mean that meaning doesn't exist in other places, right? You can find meaning potentially in life. Hopefully you do. I wish that all for you. Hopefully you have things that you care about, people you care about, and you can find that meaning even if there's nothing ultimately special about it. So that is that sort of thinking. I put Yveltal in there because he saps the life out of everything on Earth, I think, once he tries to revive himself. So we'll talk a little bit, we'll move on, I should say, to why shouldn't people eat Pokemon? And to do that, I think we have to talk about direct versus indirect consideration. So they are a little bit different. Indirect consideration is basically you don't really think Pokemon matter for Pokemon's sake, you couldn't really care less what happens to them, but you do care about maybe other people or the impact that eating a bunch of Pokemon will have maybe on the environment, something like that, right? So look at Ash here. He's having a good time. He took a picture with all his friends, right? All the dudes that he's met along the way. If you were to eat one of them, just like the Snorlax or something like that, or like a small one that maybe you wouldn't notice was gone for a while. Maybe you don't care about that Pokemon, but if you have indirect consideration, you might realize that, hey, Ash really cares about these Pokemon, right? He's their partner, he's trained them, he's spent a lot of time with them. It would hurt Ash to eat this Pokemon, and it would also maybe put to waste some of the time that he spent training them, because now he can't get the benefit of that training, right? He can't use that Pokemon to battle and stuff like that. So if you cared about Ash, you might still be indirectly concerned about his Pokemon, which might mean that you are cool with eating wild Pokemon, right? Just not ones that are caught by trainers, right? Maybe you wouldn't eat your friends, but you would eat one that you found just out in the wild, huh? You can also be concerned about the environments, if you think that is important, whether you think the environment's important on its own, or whether you think the environment is important to protect because it's good for people, right? Maybe you have that sort of concern that is, again, indirect. And yeah, environmental concerns, sort of like conservation concerns, that is pretty common, I think, in Pokemon, right? You have cases like Lapras. People have driven Lapras almost to the point of extinction. In the evenings, it is said to sing plaintively as it seeks what few others of its kind still remain. That is from Emerald. It's deep sad. And I do want to point out that we don't actually know why people are hunting Lapras. Could be for meat, could be for that horn, maybe the shell, maybe they, have like an ambergris or something like whales do, But it is the case that a lot of times Pokemon are driven to sort of like near extinction, right? Farfetch'd is potentially another example. We saw Sharpedo earlier. And, removing one link in the food web, I should say, is often pretty bad for the environment. So if you care about that, if you care about just like looking at natural beauty and a healthy environment, maybe you'd care in that way. Again, an indirect way. All right. He wears a lot of suits. I think I have one more dressed up Pikachu in here. But yeah, direct consideration. This is where you actually care about the Pokemon themselves, right? You think that they themselves are worthy of your protection, worthy of your respect, worthy of your moral consideration. This might be for a few different reasons. One of the big ones that always gets brought up is intelligence, right? Pokemon are pretty smart, so maybe we shouldn't do horrible things to them. The other one is sentience, which someone mentioned before. Thank you for that. Which is the idea that Pokemon can feel things that are happening to them. They have experiences, and thus would suffer if you ate them. Yeah. So let's talk about the first one. Pokemon are smart. I believe this is called Intern Pikachu. So when you talk about intelligence as a reason to consider something morally, obviously the question goes into like how smart would you have to be, right, to gain that sort of moral consideration? Is it that you need to be as smart as people? Is it that you need to be able to do like reason, things like that, tool use? There are a lot of, I think, lines that you can draw here if intelligence, is the number one determining factor. But Pokemon, at the very least, are smart enough to know language, right? Everyone knows Meowth, probably. He's speaking English or Japanese or whatever dub that you're listening to Pokemon in or watching Pokemon in. Kind of a rude point, but Meowth is not super smart, right? He's not like incredibly smart as compared to other Pokemon. Basically, if you don't know, he learned how to speak basically because he wanted to impress a girl. He wanted to be, a pretty fancy guy. He stood up like a man and he learned to speak. It's said nowhere that he's like particularly intelligent. So basically, this is just a skill that probably most or a lot of Pokemon can just do, right? They can learn language, they can talk to people. You also see evidence of this in an episode of the anime where the Pokemon get separated from their trainers. They end up just walking around with each other, with other Pokemon. And it's one of the only instances in the anime where they actually put subtitles on what the Pokemon are saying, right? Instead of them just like saying their names and you just kind of having to glean what they're saying from context. So that episode is where we see these subtitles from, and it's where we discover that Bulbasaur is maybe kind of an edgelord. He thinks of himself as a lone wolf, call me an orphan, I have no family. He's on that Sigma grind set, I don't know what you want to call it. But yeah, they do have a command of language, they can talk to each other, even if, we don't really understand it without those subtitles. They do have that command, they do have that ability. Right? And, some Pokemon, they're actually even smarter than us, right? I didn't put the thing here, but who knows who this is?
Alakazam.
Why would you shout it, bro? You can take one still, I don't care. We can grab one too. Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I believe you.
I think that's a lie because there is not enough people in the world for anyone to have an IQ of 5K. It's statistically not possible.
It's not a people, huh? Maybe. Do you want it? Yeah. I could bring some to you, I don't know.
Because you know how IQ is done, right? It's done by standard deviation. There's just not enough people to even have enough variance for someone to do.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, IQ, it's not like the best, obviously, test of cognitive ability, but it is, used, and I definitely don't have an IQ of 5,000. So, given that that is the case, is Alakazam justified in doing horrible things to people? Right? He is much smarter than the average person, right? Does that give him basically license? Right, to do whatever.
Why does he know that IQ 5,000 is not statistically possible?
Look, we're going off the Pokedex, all right? I'm treating it as law here. But that is the sort of thing you have to think about, right? If, say, like a more intelligent species came from outer space or something like that, right? Would they be morally justified in treating humans like they were cattle just on the basis of increased intelligence or higher intelligence? There's also this argument about marginal cases, right? Where it is potentially true that there are people who are not as intelligent as Pokemon would be, right? Maybe that's children who, still do have the potential to be as intelligent as a Pokemon or more, but maybe it's people with certain issues, right? Do you want to remove moral consideration for those people because they have those issues, because of the perceived lack of intelligence, Right? That is a big question. Because it's a big question, kind of sad, there's no picture in this one. But it's something to think about. Oop. So yeah, why does intelligence matter? Is it because, right, they're sort of capable of understanding what is happening? So if you corner one and you have a knife in your hand, they kind of know what's happening, right? And that's something that would cause them suffering, something you might want to avoid. But this could also just be sort of anthropocentric, meaning like sort of centered on humans. So people, right, we take great pride in our intelligence as something that separates us from animals. And so we put a very big emphasis on the intelligence of creatures because that's what we think is important, because that's what's special about us. But it might not be, the actual, the reason you decide that a life is more important than another one. But it is something that comes up. So let's talk about sentience. Sentience is the ability to experience feelings and sensations. So this does not necessarily mean that you have human-like intelligence. This is basically just you being able to experience things like pain or like have happy experiences, right? Joy, stuff like that. Sapience is probably the thing that is used more to describe more like rationality and stuff like that. But sentience is often the baseline for a lot of people's moral consideration. For other creatures, I've heard it called sapiocentrism or sentientism, stuff like that. Who knows what that ball is?
Friend ball.
Why would you shout that? You can say. I don't know.
Yeah, friend ball.
It is a Pokeball. I mean, you can grab a candy if you want. I don't really mind. Also, whoever shouted out friend ball, you can grab one as well, because that's true. So yeah, I mean, Pokemon are able to experience a lot of different stuff. Friendship is just one of them, which is why I put that friend ball up there. But I think probably general consensus, if I went around the room, would be that Pokemon are indeed sentient. Look at this guy. He's so sad. I believe this is probably that time Ash tried to throw hands with Mewtwo, and he ended up sort of getting frozen in carbonite or whatever that was. But obviously Pikachu's sad about it, right? He feels that emotion. He is suffering right now because Ash has been turned into a rock or something like that. You also see this a lot in battles, right? You see Pokemon, struggling, potentially in pain when they're close to fainting or have fainted, which sort of raises the question, because you see that basically in all battles, right? That you see in the series. Are there Pokemon that do not have this trait, right? That are not sentient, that cannot suffer, and thus you don't need to consider them morally? If you have some ideas, you can talk about it at the end when I do questions. But here's one that maybe I think fits that criteria. Parasect. Yeah? The bug is mostly dead, with the mushroom on its back having become the main body. If the mushroom comes off, the bug stops moving. Is this a Pokemon at that point? I mean, this is a dead creature, potentially not sentient anymore, because they're dead. So the question would be if the mushroom, right, is sort of feeling and experiencing. And if that is the case, and if that is not the case, then yeah, potentially you would have free reign to do what you want with this thing, if you wanted to.
Those Pokemon are dead, and they are clearly sentient and have feelings.
That's true too, but they also move on their own without a mushroom like controlling them. So yeah, pleasure and pain. We talk about that a lot with sentience. A lot of people think that this is pretty directly morally relevant, right? It's important to sort of emphasize pleasure and decrease pain. There is sort of philosophical stance about this in utilitarianism, which holds the greatest happiness of the greatest number should be the guiding principle of conduct. So yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, essentially you should try to make sure that the most amount of people are happy as possible, right, and decrease the number of people who are in pain or suffering. as much as possible. Which, on its face, sounds pretty solid. That sounds like a pretty good idea. Theoretically, you could justify some pretty bad stuff if the results of an action would lead to more happiness, right? So if you, say, did experiments on someone or something, and the results of that experiment was, increased happiness for a lot of different people, right? You made a new drug, something like that. You made a new product that improves the lives of other people. Theoretically, you could justify it through this sort of method. So be careful about that when you think about it. Happiness is just up there because, happiness Pokemon. Huh? Can you eliminate suffering? So when we talk about, animal rights as well as Pokemon rights in here, right? A lot of people will maybe bring up that, during the process of creating food, everything is done quick and hopefully painless. But that is something that is basically impossible to completely eliminate, right, from any sort of process. The notion that animals or Pokemon are suffering, right? If it's hunting, well, you have to consider that no person who is hunting is going to be perfect. Perfect at whatever sort of hunting they're doing. So there's always going to be animals that sort of fall through the cracks, that survive initially, that maybe shouldn't, and this is going to cause suffering. Farming, especially if it's industrialized farming, is something that also is a potential source of suffering for a lot of Pokemon. In real life, right, there was a recent study that came out that said something like 80 billion animals across the world died before actually going into the food system, right? So before being cooked and eaten, without being cooked and eaten, right? So they're basically wasted. So these were animals who were sick or injured, ended up dying on farms or in transport, things like that. And it's not something that you can really eliminate. The suffering of those animals isn't really something you can eliminate from any sort of industrialized system. So think about that a little bit. But we do have to think about byproducts as well. They are things, I don't know if byproducts is the best word for it, but I'm calling them byproducts. Things produced by Pokemon, whether it's milk, whether it's eggs, whether it's cream. The existence of these products in Pokemon, I think, brings up something pretty interesting in that Pokemon may or may not be intelligent enough, rational enough to offer these products up freely, right? So someone's talked about Miltank before. This Pokemon needs to be milked every day or else it will fall ill. This is different from regular cows in that, cows could potentially just give the milk to their offspring. They don't necessarily need to be milked every day by people. Also difference of this next Pokedex entry, if it has just had a baby, the milk it produces contains much more nutrition than normal. We talked about nutrition a little bit before. This is also different from regular animals in that Miltank, it seems like from this Pokedex entry, does not need to be, let's say, with egg or have a baby in order to produce milk. This is different from real cows, so you have to keep that in mind as well when you think about the differences between those two. Also something to think about is that in real animals, real animals that are farmed, right? They do not reach their max lifespan, even if you are just taking byproducts from them. This is because the output of those animals goes down over time, right? So like egg production slows down, milk production slows down, and then they're sent to the slaughter plant, potentially, years before they would have died normally, right? But there's nothing that I can detect in Pokemon lore that says that is the case for Pokemon like Miltank. It is possible that they produce the same amount of milk for the entirety of their lives. And yeah, would thus be a solid source, I think, of milk for however long they live. Chansey, something that produces eggs. Because the eggs on their bellies have been over-harvested by people in the past, the Chansey population remains very small. So this is another like environmental sort of issue, potentially, if you are harvesting too many Chansey eggs. But it also says it's a gentle and kind-hearted Pokemon that shares its nutritious eggs if it sees an injured Pokemon. So this could be the case where a Pokemon can willingly give up the byproducts that it creates, which, you know, in certain people's minds would make that a moral act, or morally okay to take that, right? Sort of the same thing with Alcremie. When it trusts a trainer, it will treat them to berries that's decorated with cream. The cream is produced by this Pokemon's body. You do not have to eat this Pokemon in its entirety to get that cream. It sort of can serve it up willingly. As it says in the second one, right? The cream it secretes from its hands becomes sweeter and richer, right? So yeah, we've talked about a lot of stuff, maybe too much. But yeah, I do want to get people's thoughts on things, what they think are sort of strong arguments. If you say something, I'll give you candy, that's fine. Any name the trait arguments, or honestly, even if you just wanted to be like, hey, I would probably eat that guy, yeah? Yeah.
Inside the Pokemon universe, there are Pokemon trainers that deal with the ecosystem and the like. Is it possible that they also are similar in the case of what you do as real work in that statement? Because they are not only making sure that the Pokemon live in their sustainable environment, but also making sure that they are relatively okay.
We're talking about rangers, someone else?
Yes, the Pokemon Rangers.
Fair enough, yeah. That could be a part of their job description, I don't really know. It is somewhat similar, I think, to what I do. Yeah, I haven't played any Pokemon Ranger games, actually. I only know them from the main series titles. But it is, right, there are obviously some people in the Pokemon games that care about that sort of thing. The Rangers are one. Obviously, you had that, like, you know, Team Plasma dressed Pikachu, even though they sort of turned on a head and basically got tricked into doing what they were doing. But yeah, people like that do exist. You can have more candy if you want.
Might be a bit too long antithesis of what you're spelling out for, but I feel like we're taking this into a very Western Americanized context. I mean, they did have actually just putting us in the front and center, where this is a Pokemon world where there's deities, where there's guardians, where there's a hierarchy already set up. I mean, we have Arceus bringing that, even though I don't know it's well, very hideous. But, you know, I feel like we just kind of think us like, if we bring Pokemon here, the arguments would work. But we are putting ourselves in this conversation to the Pokemon world. So suddenly, well, we have a god, for sure, that everybody knows, that says it's okay. If we go to the anime, Ash Super Strength is an exception to the rule because that's just a wish from Ho-Oh, which again brings us to Ho-Oh, which grants people's wishes and also people pray to. So there's a lot, so we move away from Western way of thinking. Well, if we go back to China, India, where we praise animals as well, so we choose to eat them. For example, India with cows. That things might be closer to what we are having Pokemon than what is here in the US. And I feel like we couldn't put it in the wrong context. It's like, well, yeah, some people would not eat Pokemon like Rangers, and we see most of the shows it's berries, but some other people in the game, Rangers, well, it's regional. For example, the latest game where they decided to have sandwiches everywhere and put a whole Pokemon in a sandwich, it's normal. And then there's the idea of the sentience. Well, in the anime, again, the first sentence, and in the anime, the sentience comes from humans. Every wild Pokemon Ash ever met was animal, was wanderers of humans. It's only when spending time with humans that get human-like attributes, human-like intelligence.
I'm not sure that's true on that point. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of wild Pokemon Ash will meet, especially like in movies and stuff, right, that he does not catch, that still fit that sort of description of sentience. I think the religious thing is very interesting. You're right that world does have an Arceus and other gods. I don't know of any lore about like what Arceus' laws are, if he has commandments or anything like that. But that is something to think about.
Well, I guess that does bring another point is like, Pokemon is kind of an umbrella term for the entirety of the animal kingdom. It's just like, we're not exactly on the apex in the Pokemon world. There are things above us and things below us. It's really fundamentally different than how here it's like, we've universally decided eating dogs is not a good thing, but we don't necessarily feel the same way about eating cows.
I mean, I wouldn't call it universal for that. Sorry. Yeah, that is one as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so those are in Gold and Silver, right? They are taken forcibly, right, by Team Rocket. Probably something that the Slowpokes don't enjoy, since you as the player character do have to stop them from doing that. The pain probably takes a long time to reach them, if it does. But yeah, that is something
They
that
can't evolve into Slowbro if their tails are gone.
that's true. It robs them from some potential, which is something to think about as well.
Yeah. All right. So all of this has got me pretty hungry, and putting all of your morals aside, what are your recommendations, dude? Like which one would you most likely eat?
I'd probably go with byproducts. That would be my recommendation. Or I have heard about people, even in real life, doing sort of like scavenging before. Some people call it freeganism, yeah? Where it's an animal that has already died, so there's no like suffering you didn't cause any suffering in that sort of animal. That might be the case, or that might be a situation you run into in the Pokemon world. But yeah, probably mostly byproducts. Okay?
I would eat Vaporeon.
Vaporeon. Maybe that's the better thing people would do with Vaporeon.
I feel like
Pokemon do have sentience and are able to speak based on what we showed from Bulbasaur. They do have a sense of moral systems of their own. So can we not judge the Pokemon for eating other Pokemon, like Pidgeotto eating Magikarp?
Oh yeah, you can. That I think is a sort of where it gets sort of muddy with Pokemon, right? Because there's a part of the lore that wants to treat them like animals, because a lot of them do have that form, and there's a part of the lore that wants to heavily anthropomorphize them, right? Obviously, like the Pokemon that are caught that interact with their trainers, they understand basically everything that the trainers are saying. Pokemon will act morally by themselves sometimes in the anime. I'm pretty sure there's some shorts where you see Pikachu trying to save Togepi from various things. So I think, yeah, that is a good point. It's just like a really muddy thing that the Pokemon world doesn't really clear up.
In Pokemon Legends Arceus, there were 25 evolutions or entirely new Pokemon. In that canon, that game was set in the past, so they were probably hunted to extinction.
Yeah, that is potentially the case. I mean, you have like Ursaluna, stuff like that. Maybe like a cave bear analog. But yeah, those are Pokemon that potentially went extinct. I don't know of any lore that says exactly why that would have happened. If you do.
One of them was a fish. I forgot the name, but it was like limited. It was like in the house.
Ooh, what was that? Basculegion.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
In one of the games, there is this Pokemon, I believe its name is Appleton, and it says mistake was a real apple, so just bite out of it.
Yeah. Look, sometimes things happen. Mistakes are made. The thing about mistakes is there are things people